Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Acetates, Establishing an Agronomic Advantage While Differentiating in the Marketplace, presented by CultivAce. I'm Robin Sitberg of Meister Media Worldwide, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. This webinar has been approved for half CEU credit in nutrient management from CCA. If you've attended our webinars before, this process for receiving your credit is a little bit different than in years past, so please take note. At some point during this webinar, an attendance poll will be sent and you must respond to receive credit. If you respond, once the webinar is finished, you'll receive an email with the QR code for reporting your credit. You simply scan the QR code and submit it. Please do not close your browser before the event is fully ended or you'll not receive the email with the QR code. So this is really important. This is also for the viewers watching the archived version. We will have time for some questions at the end of the webinar, as usual. If at any time during the presentation you'd like to ask a question, just go ahead and type it in the questions pane at the lower corner of your screen. And you can do this at any time during the webinar, and we'll answer questions at the end. Before we begin, I'm going to introduce today's speakers. Wayne Sledge is president and founder of CultivAce, a West Coast-based fertilizer manufacturer. Wayne has more than 50 years of experience in the field of agriculture and began his career as a grower. He eventually transitioned to fertilizer sales and was quickly promoted up the chain, managing several locations along the way while acting as a formulator. In the early 2000s, Wayne founded his own company driven by two fundamental principles. One is our products must be of the highest quality, and the second is they must make the grower money. If a product can't meet those standards, we don't manufacture it. So from its humble beginnings, CultivAce products are now available nationwide, and through our partner companies, hundreds of thousands of acres are treated with CultivAce products every year. And amidst all the growth, Wayne and every CultivAce employee stay dedicated to the original company mission. Our second speaker is Brock Coursey, and he's marketing manager for CultivAce. Brock has grown up around agriculture his entire life and has been a part of CultivAce for 8 years. He holds an MBA from Indiana University, and he's always been interested in the intersection of business and agriculture. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Wayne.
Great. Thank you, Robin. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today and getting a little more insight into our acetate foliar nutrition technology. A little bit about myself when we get started here is that actually, when I first started out actually working on the farm, it was like you were 8 or 9 years old. And when you were in grade school, we were the harvesters for a lot of different crops. And I wasn't very good at picking anything. Picked a lot of beans and strawberries, probably ate more strawberries than actually the farmer ever got. So I wasn't really very good at it. And so when I got to be 13 years old, I found that I could go out and actually work by the hour. And so that's when I actually started working on the farms and just we were in row crop farms, moving irrigation pipe and all those kinds of things that go along with that. So anyway, when I was 19 years old and in college, I got the opportunity to start farming in the family farm and thought that'd be a pretty good way to start a career. And it didn't take me too long to figure out that I had a real problem. I like to eat regularly, and it didn't look like that was going to happen in the late 60s in agriculture in the Willamette Valley. So I got the opportunity to start working in the fertilizer ag chem business and started doing that after I got out of college and have done that for ever since. So been at this business a long time. When I started my own business here in the early 2000s, basically started with just 3 different products: potassium acetate, calcium acetate, copper acetate. So I've been at this quite a while and have had a lot of success in this industry. Basically how we started, our products have to meet a couple of different criteria. One, I want the highest quality product that I can make. And number 2, I want to make sure that that product makes that grower money. Because at the end of the day, if he doesn't make money with what I'm doing, then it's all for naught, in my opinion. So I really want him to be successful and to gain yield from what we're doing. Where we're at right now, we started actually in the Willamette Valley in Oregon, started marketing Oregon, Washington, California. We branched out some into Idaho, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and the last couple of years have stretched out into the upper Midwest regions. So we've moved product into that region a little bit and are expanding out there. So spending a lot of time and energy in seeing where we can get our products moved into those areas and into the crops in those areas. One of the things that I think about when I'm thinking about what we're doing is, could the growers' yield actually be better? And I think one of the things that we always start thinking about, everybody knows about, the 4 R's, the right place, the right time. But one of the things that I also think about that some people don't is maybe we've got the right product and maybe it's the right time, but is it the right transport mechanism to get that product into that plant as efficiently as possible? So I think that's one thing that everybody really needs to be thinking about. Is it really the right thing to be using to get that nutrient into that plant when it needs to be there? So I think that's really important. Why would you foliar feed? Well, naturally, you're going to do it because it's fast. You can actually use less product. You get the same job done. You don't have to go through soil conditions that will tend to tie nutrients up. And the plants can absorb it and get it to the areas in the plant where they need it, and in a very, very timely fashion. So I think that's really important when we start looking at nutrients and how we're delivering nutrients to that plant. As you can see, when you get a foliar delivery into that plant, you get into that plant very rapidly, and it doesn't take very much nutrient to elicit a response. In the soil, on the other hand, there are a lot of things in that soil that can grab that nutrient and hold it tightly and not let it get to that plant. So the delivery system is a lot better with foliars, but it's especially true of the micronutrients, not so much with the typical major nutrients. I think everybody probably has been exposed to this slide over the years and have seen how effective it is to use potassium as a potassium acetate. This trial was done at Texas A&M in the early 2000s. And everybody sees these 4 or 5 other products that they were looking at, but actually they looked at over 30 different forms of potassium. So it was a pretty extensive study that they did. And you can see how effective potassium acetate was. My thought when I started all of this and when I saw this slide was, if that's true, then wouldn't it also be true of the other elements? And so that's what led me down this road to start this whole process and look into making the nutrients out of acetates. And if we look at some of the advantages of an acetate, what would those be? Well, immediately you start thinking about, what do plants make? And one of the things that they make as a plant root exudate is acetic acid. So those plants are making acids and exuding those. So when you spray an acetate onto that plant recognizes it as something it already makes. So it's not foreign to the plant. So the plant knows what it is. It knows what it's doing with the elements. So it's just a really, really good delivery system. It's easy for the plant to absorb. The molecules that we're making are very small and very active. And so they can get into the plant very easily and very rapidly, and they break down very easily and very rapidly. And not like an EDTA, which, a lot of people will chelate with those. And the problem there is they just don't break down easily. They don't get into the plant easily. And plants do not make EDTA. So the plant really doesn't know what to do with it once it gets into there. So if we look at acetates, like I said, the advantage is the molecule is small, it's native. On the other hand, chelates are larger and held more tightly. And so they're just not a very good delivery system for a foliar application. And one of the ways you can take a look at the different elements is if you look at the molecular structure. On the left-hand side, we've got an iron acetate. You can see that that's a pretty small molecule, and the iron isn't held very tightly in there. It's just 2 oxygen bonds that's holding that in there. So it can come apart real easily. And on the other hand, on the right-hand side, you see iron EDTA, and you can see how tightly that's held. And what that shows is that it's just not going to get out of there very easily. Another way you can judge the size of that molecule is if you look at its weight, and you'll notice that iron acetate, the molecule weighs about 174 grams per mole. On the other hand, an EDTA weighs about 435 grams per mole, which is 2.5 times heavier, which means it's 2.5 times larger. So it's just a lot bigger molecule, a lot more complex, and the metal is not going to come out of there very easily. The main advantage of an EDTA in my mind is 1, it works very, very well in soils, and 2, if I'm going to formulate a product with an EDTA, I can throw all kinds of things together and not have an interaction between them. So from a formulator standpoint, when I'm mixing different acetates together, I have to exactly know what I'm doing, because sometimes those will interact, because those molecules are very active and will actually interact with one another. So we do have a full line of acetates. All of the metals, all of the micros, we have formulated into acetate products. We have custom proprietary formulations with our products. We're pH adjusted. Typically, the pH that you're going to see in our products is in the 4 to 5, low 6 range. And I think that's very important. When you're looking at using a foliar, you typically want to keep your pHs down in that mid 6 to mid 5 range, because that's kind of the range of a plant pH, and they're just a lot more plant friendly if they're at that pH level. You don't want it too low, and you don't want it too high. So that's kind of the sweet spot in my mind in making a foliar. And I really try and make sure that my products are clean, and so we don't have problems with things in the bottom of the jugs when you pour them out. I really harp on that. Really want good, clean products. Our products are based on science, the science that shows that when we're putting something on the plant, it's actually going to work. We're going to get that into that plant, and as much as we can. We filter everything as much as we can, and we want really clean products, and we don't want to have problems and create issues with the products in the field. When we formulate, typically we're trying to get as much nutrient into that product as we possibly can. Typically our products are going to have from 5 to 8% nutrients in each of the formulations. The other thing I think that's really important is to be able to quantify what we have. So we want to be able to measure the results and see what we've done and if we're doing a good job. And when I talk about amounts that's in the product, you know, I've seen a lot of products that will have like a 0.1% of something in a formulation. And so what I did a few years ago was I sat down and asked myself, how much actual nutrient are you going to get out of that 0.1%? So the assumption I made is I said, okay, let's assume that we have a foliar fertilizer and we have 0.1% and it weighs 10 pounds per gallon, and we're going to apply 1 quart per acre. So those are all pretty standard numbers, I think. And so when I did the math, what I came up with is you're going to apply 1 gram per acre. And I think one of the problems we kind of have not understanding a lot of times and working with those kinds of measurements is 1 gram's not very much. That is 1 gram. So if you think, I understand that foliars are very effective, but I kind of doubt that putting that much of an element on an acre of ground is going to get a very large benefit for anybody. So even though you can put it on the label, I don't believe in using those super low rates, unless it's something very, very active. And I think there are maybe some exceptions to what I just said. So if you're looking at maybe something like molybdenum or cobalt, maybe that might be the case. But boy, most of the other elements, you have to have a whole lot more than that to really get to where you need to be. When I was doing a bunch of research originally on that, looking at different forms of foliars, one of the trials and studies that I came across was one that was done at the University of Arkansas. And they were looking at EDTAs and how well they would work and if that was a good mechanism to get zinc and iron primarily into crops. And what they found was that the EDTA actually competed against the aqueous pores of the plant leaf, so that it wasn't a very, very good way to get any nutrient into that plant. So their finding was this, that EDTAs should not be a trace element source of foliars. The other thing they did say was that soil applied chelates are valuable and a good application method. And so EDTAs do have their place. They work very, very well in the soil, but they're not really what you want to be using as a foliar. Now let's spend a little bit of time looking at some of the information that we have come up with where we have tried our products against different formulations. And so what I'm going to show you is some of the test work that we've done over the last couple of years. In this trial, we were looking at manganese. And when we did these, these are actually average numbers out of 4 reps out of each trial. So we're using complete randomized block design and taking an average of everything that we collected for the data. And these were done by independent research people. So you see in manganese, the untreated were about 117 ppm in the tissue. When we used EDTA manganese, about 133. So we got a little bump. We used an amino acid chelate, got about the same results. But when we used an acetate, you can look at how much more. You were at 171 parts per million. So we've got, 30% more roughly over the EDTA. So we did a really good job, I think, of getting that element into that tissue. And these are all done at relatively the same amount of pounds of active per acre. We also took a look at iron. And with iron, when you're in a soil situation where you have a high pH soil and basically have calcium-induced iron chlorosis, one of the problems there is that EDTAs in that situation really don't even work. So what they found over time was that by using EDDHAs in the soil, you can actually get that iron into that plant. However, some of the things I've seen is that people that are selling those said, well, okay, you can use it there. Why don't we also take that same EDDHA and use it as a foliar? So that's why we put it in a trial to see how it would stack up as a foliar. Well, what we found was that if you look at the untreated, we've got 71 ppm. Where we applied the EDDHA iron, we're down to 67. So we actually went backwards. And where we used iron acetate, you can see we were up to like 103 ppm. So we can get a response where if you try to use something like an EDTA, I think what happened probably is we're actually pulling some of that iron out of the plant. So probably going the wrong direction when you're trying to do something like that. Zinc, I mean, I think that's probably one of the more common minor elements that people will apply. In this trial, we just did an untreated of 31 ppm. Where we used a zinc EDTA, we're at 33. And I guess looking at those numbers, I would have to say that probably the EDTA zinc didn't do very much. However, look at the acetate. We're up to 80 ppm. So we really get a pretty good bump. We're getting a lot of that element into that plant at a comparable rate. One of the other things that we were asked was, well, if it works as a foliar, what about putting it in the soil? So what we did is we decided to take a trial and try that. So these numbers that we generated in this trial, we were actually putting all of the materials through drip system. And so you can see on the check, we're at about 16 ppm of zinc. With an EDTA, it goes up to 33.7. That's kind of what you would expect. The EDTA should work really well in the soil, and it does. Another product we tried against it was a sugar alcohol. Yeah, they went up to 27, so yeah, there was a response. But with the zinc acetate, we got almost exactly the same amount of zinc into that plant as you would with an EDTA. So will they work as a soil applied product? Absolutely. And that's what we wanted to look at. That's where we're at. It does work through the soil as well. I want to take a little bit of time and look at how the soil actually interacts with different nutrients and how they will prevent uptake of some of the other elements. And I think probably most people are familiar with a Mulder's chart. I know a lot of times when I show a Mulder's chart to somebody, their eyes kind of glaze over. And probably mine did too at first until I really got to understand what it meant. So when you look at the interactions on these, what you're seeing, a solid line with arrows, basically means that when you put that element on, it's going to reduce the effectiveness of another one. Dotted lines mean that, and you put that element on, it increases the need for the other element. So since it's as undaunting as what it is, one of the things that we did was we made this interactive. So if you go on our website, scroll down to the bottom of our website and look at our Mulder's chart. What you're going to see is if you hold your cursor over an element, all the other elements and lines will go away. So you can see exactly what that element is going to impact. And so as I go through these next few slides, I will show you exactly how that works. So it works out really well if you're trying to look at different nutrients and how they interact. One of the things about a Mulder's chart, what it shows you is that if you put on a high nitrogen, you're going to impact boron, potassium, copper. If you put on a high level of phosphate, you're going to impact your iron, calcium, potassium, copper, and zinc. High potassium levels, you're going to decrease manganese or magnesium availability. So the long and the short of it is if you're just focused on high amounts of N, P, and K, you're really going to reduce the availability of a lot of other elements. So the take-home message, I think, of that is this is a balanced system that we work with. And so all nutrients are important. And if you overdo one thing, you're going to underdo something else. So you have to be aware, I think, of what you're doing when you're putting elements on and how they interact with one another. So I think it's very, very important. And I'll show you a few of these examples as we go through these next few slides. So you can see here that copper will impact iron and manganese. So if you have a large amount of copper in that soil or apply a large amount, that's what you're going to impact. What copper does is it activates plant enzymes. It works in protein synthesis, photosynthesis, respiration, nitrogen metabolism. It's in 100 different proteins in the plant. So it's really a prevalent element in the plant. And I guess when I think about copper and what it does, copper imparts flexibility to the bark of a plant. So it allows it to stretch. So as that plant's growing, it needs to have that bark to where it actually will expand and contract a little bit. So the nutrient flow up through your xylem tissues, everything will work a whole lot better. You get the bark too tight, you'll see cracking in trees. A lot of times that's an indication of lack of copper. Sap will ooze out. The other thing I think about with copper is cell wall lignification. So like I said, if you put on a lot of nitrogen and you block your copper uptake, and copper's key in cell wall lignification, now you've got lodging. So sometimes the lodging can be an indication of copper deficiency. One of the other things I think about copper is pollination. When you go to rupture the pollen sac, you have to have copper in that plant to have that pollen sac rupture and get your pollen to spread. Soil high in organic matter a lot of times is copper deficient. And also calcareous soils have the potential of being copper deficient. Calcium, good old calcium. Calcium is used in the construction of the cell walls. It's important for cell wall permeability. It's a messenger in the plant. And in order to really get the calcium to work in the plant, you need boron there with it. Very, very important to get that boron with that calcium. And you have to have it for formation of new cells. So when I think about calcium, I'm always thinking about cell division. So as the fruit or the crop is starting to develop in its younger stages, you're dividing cells. You're trying to get as much cell division as you can to get a potential number of cells into that fruit. One of the interactions with calcium is potassium and magnesium can prevent plant uptake. So those cations tend to actually work against one another. So you'd have to have a pretty good balance of those. But you can see how much calcium does impact. It's a pretty strong element. It impacts a lot of different things. Potassium. Potassium's essential for transports of sugars and formations of starches in the plant. So when you're trying to drive sugars in your plant, into your fruit, you have to have that potassium there to do that. It's responsible for opening and closing the stomata. It gives the turgor strength to the guard cells. So if you're in a situation where you have a lot of heat, those guard cells will close and prevent transpiration of moisture out of that plant. So potassium is really important for that. The other thing, you're increasing your numbers of flowers, your size of flowers, and the size of your fruit. So when I think about potassium, I'm thinking cell expansion. So first you make the cells with your calcium, then you switch to your potassium to get those cells to expand. So it's cell expansion that you're trying to do with potassium. So you're filling the cells up. It's like blowing up a balloon. The soil has an awful lot of potassium in it, but we get to use a very, very small amount, typically less than 2%. So at any one time, you can't get a whole lot of calcium out of that soil. The other thing that I think about with potassium is that when you get into dry soil, you don't get any potassium out of that soil, unfortunately. And calcium and magnesium can really work against you to try and get uptake into that plant of your potassium. Magnesium, you can see here, if you go in and throw a bunch of magnesium on, you're going to do two things. One, you're going to impact your potassium, and two, you're going to need to put on more phosphate. So that's the interaction basically of that nutrient. You have to have magnesium to get chlorophyll. So to get the green in the plant, you got to have magnesium. It's also an enzyme regulator, and it's used in the protein synthesis. Sandy soils can be deficient. High soil levels of potassium, calcium, ammonium, and manganese can depress the uptake of magnesium. Zinc. Zinc's one of those that, like I said, a lot of people understand that if you apply a zinc, you're gonna have phosphorus issues. The other thing is iron. And so you can see here, as you apply zinc, you're going to depress your iron. Normally, what you think of is, if I'm going to put zinc on, maybe I ought to think about putting some iron with it. It's a structural component in enzymes. It's involved in energy metabolism, synthesis of plant proteins, and it controls your indoleacetic acid, the IAA in the plant. Low organic matter soils and sandy soils are often deficient in zinc. Large phosphorus applications can induce a zinc deficiency. High calcium soils can prevent zinc uptake. Photosynthesis in corn is more greatly affected by zinc deficiency than soybeans. So that's some things you want to think about when you're working with zinc. And like I said, a lot of people will apply zinc. Very, very important nutrient. Iron's used also in the formation of chlorophyll, and as most of you probably are aware, if you really want to turn a plant dark green, iron's the key. Works really well for that. It's an activator of biochemical processes such as respiration, photosynthesis, and nitrogen fixation. If you apply iron, you're also going to depress your phosphate. Most soil iron is unavailable. Deficient in alkali or calcium soils, high levels of zinc, manganese, and copper can prevent the uptake. And I think one of the things when I think about iron and the reason that it's not available and why it is unavailable is the state that it's in. I think most of your iron in your soil you would find was iron 3. In order to get that into that plant and make it plant available, you have to kick it back to iron 2. So it doesn't like to be in that state very long. So that's one of the reasons why we have some issues with iron. And like most elements, when your pH goes up, the availability of the nutrients goes down. So as you get into more and more acid situations in your soil, most of your micronutrients are going to be more and more available to a point as the pH goes down. Above 7, they're usually not very available. Molybdenum, on the other hand, is just to the opposite. So as your molybdenum availability gets to be greater and greater, it's as your pH goes up rather than down. So you get down into the 6s, you don't get much moly. But as you apply molybdenum, you need to have an increase in nitrogen and also copper. It's required for N utilization, so moly is very, very important when you start looking at legumes, especially clover, peas, soybeans, those type of crops really, really need molybdenum. And yeah, it's dangerous to forage animals, so that's why on all the labels where you're putting moly on, you're gonna see a danger statement for ruminant animals. But like I said, acid soils, you can prevent the uptake. and sulfate can suppress molybdenum. And it's highly mobile in the plant. So when you go to spray it on, it moves very rapidly through the plant. But what the real important thing is that biology really needs that molybdenum to make everything work. So very, very important to get that into that plant. Manganese. Manganese is used in photosynthesis. It's an enzyme activator. It assists in chlorophyll production. And some of the interactions you can see, like I said, with a lot of the elements, you get that pH above 7, and you're not going to get that element available to that plant. It's going to get bound. High levels of iron and zinc, you're going to tend to reduce those. So we want to make sure that when we're putting those on, you just got to be aware of these interactions and watch what you're doing. Potassium can increase the need for manganese. And one of the things that I learned early on when I was doing some applications of potassium especially, was as we ran the potassium levels up in that crop, what we were trying to do was get potassium into that plant to expand those cells. And like I said earlier, cell expansion is what we were working on. We were trying to get the fruit as large as we could. And so my thought was, well, let's just keep hammering potassium in there. So we were putting it on as a soil application. We were putting it on through the foliage. And what I noticed was suddenly I was seeing manganese deficiency signs in the plant. So what I did is I turned around and added manganese, and it was amazing to see the difference in how that plant responded and how the fruit size changed. It was just almost unbelievable to me that you could get that much of a response from something like manganese, and not at a very high amount. Like I said, we were really hammering the potassium into that plant. We were driving it really hard. And so that's, I think, one of the things I think that most people are not aware of is how important that is. And the other thing, too, is if you're producing seed, you have to have manganese. So a lot of times when you're looking at your crop and you see abortions, the seed not filling, sometimes you might suspect that you may have a problem with manganese. So, did something else that you put on interfere with that? Did you have too much zinc and that interfered with your manganese? And so you're not getting the uptake, and so you're not getting the fill, so you're not getting the crop you want. And like I said, the thing that you got to remember that we're trying to do is we're trying to balance everything in this soil, in this plant system, to try and maximize everything that we do. So we're running a very fine line on making sure we've got enough of everything, not too much of any one thing, and trying to work as well as we can on getting a good balance of nutrients in there. So very, very critical to balance those nutrients to make sure we're getting what we need at the plant at the right time, at the right rate, and in the right balance. The other thing that you can think about with manganese also is glyphosate can induce a manganese deficiency as well. So sometimes when we have situations where we're going in with a glyphosate application, one other thing you may be thinking about is you may at that point in time causing yourself a problem with manganese and reducing the manganese. So I think these are very, very important things to remember as you look at these nutrients. And so I think from an agronomic standpoint, we're pretty good at kind of understanding those and trying to fulfill those plants' needs for those nutrients when they need them. So that's kind of what we're up to. I think our products fulfill that need, and we're willing to help you in any way that we can to get the balanced nutrition, get the crop responses that grower requires. So with that, I'll turn this over to Brock. Brock is our director of all of our marketing. So he's going to go ahead and give you some information about products. Go for it, Brock.
Awesome. Thank you, Wayne. So I'm going to switch gears here from the agronomic side to looking at the business side here. I'd like to start today by sharing some information you're all no doubt familiar with. This is pulled directly from CropLife themselves, and it really highlights current industry trends and kind of hints at where the market is headed in the future. The top 8 companies in the CropLife 100 control 70% of the CropLife 100 market. That is to say, the largest companies hold a majority of the market share. And for those of you that receive CropLife industry updates, it comes as no great shock that large companies are continuing to get larger through mergers and acquisitions. Now, this presents some unique challenges for the other 92 companies in the CropLife 100, especially in a marketplace where our customers are increasingly seeing our products as commodities. Now, the shift in customer thinking becomes even more concerning when we see the advantages large firms have in marketplaces like that. Large firms often have a competitive advantage due to something called economies of scale, where through streamlined and high volume production, they are more efficient at spreading per unit cost and therefore able to offer products at a lower price while maintaining their profitability. This gives them a significant advantage over smaller firms. But with that being said, all's not lost. As smaller firms, we can differentiate. I'd like to employ a boxing analogy here. We're in a boxing match against a big power puncher, and we're not as large. Now, we can try and slug it out, but eventually we'll tire and be outmatched. You know, if we try and compete with large firms at their own game, we're going to lose. Because after all, as we said earlier, our customers view all of our products as essentially identical. Now, I'd like to share with you some survey results. These are results pulled from the Purdue Large Commercial Producer Survey conducted in 2021 by Dr. Scott Downey and the team at Purdue University. The survey tracked the attitudes of large producers as well as ag retail professionals. So as a result of being perceived as a commodity, our large customers are more likely to switch for a 5% discount. As a result of being viewed as a commodity, price is the most important attribute when a customer selects a dealer or retailer, with service quality coming second. That means all that time spent cultivating trust and fostering a relationship with our customers comes second when they view all of our products as essentially the same. And finally, as a result of commoditization, young growers increasingly believe they know more than suppliers about products, because in their minds, all our product offerings are the same. So once they've learned about one, they've learned about them all. As we said earlier in the presentation, differentiation is the most significant tool in our arsenal as smaller firms. When we differentiate, we gain a competitive advantage in the marketplace. When we differentiate, we provide a unique product that our competitors can't. When we differentiate, we decommoditize the product in our customers' eyes. And when we differentiate, we build brand loyalty and increase our brand recognition. Now, if we do an exceptional job of increasing brand recognition, we can end up like companies like Band-Aid or Kleenex. While we use these terms in our common day vernacular, Band-Aid is actually the brand name for an adhesive bandage, and Kleenex is the brand name for a tissue. When we succeed in brand recognition, we become synonymous with the product in our customers' minds. Now, we can also, when we combine our differentiation with being early adopters of technology, we can realize an advantage as first market movers, being the first to market to gain and hold market share that can be difficult for our competitors to interrupt. So at this point, you may be asking yourself, how do we do this? Well, CultivAce can help. CultivAce is the only company that offers a full line of acetates as well as custom blending with those acetates, allowing you to stand out in a crowded marketplace with a wholly unique product offering. CultivAce can provide your team with versatile tools and equip them with knowledge about a delivery method your customers likely know very little about, allowing you once again to become expert sources of information. And most importantly, CultivAce can provide you with efficient products that help maximize your growers' ROI, helping them realize their top priority and making you the hero of the story once again. Now, we're in the information age where product innovation happens relatively quickly. As smaller firms, we can move faster than larger firms, which are often bogged down by layer upon layer of organizational bureaucracy. To revisit our boxing analogy, agility is our way of winning the match. Adopting acetate technology and being first to market in your area is how you win. However, these opportunities aren't going to last forever, as large firms won't take threats to their market share lightly. Now, if you leave here with one thing today, I ask that you please consider this. What could it mean for my organization to have a unique product under our own brand? At CultivAce, we value loyalty to our manufacturing partners above all else. Once we foster a relationship, we do everything in our power to help it succeed. We're not in the business of selling up and down the road. Now, if that is a relationship you value and acetate technology makes sense for your organization, here's how to get started. Reach out today to a member of our business development team. Doug Elliott covers the Southwest. Chad Calhoun covers the Midwest. Chuck Pepple covers the North Central states. And Obadiah Humat covers the PNW. Or you can visit our website and contact info@cultivacegrowth.com. I'd like to thank you for your time today, and now I'm going to turn it back over to Robin for questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Brock and Wayne. And we do have a number of questions here. So I'm going to, if you have questions, we have, let's see, about 10 minutes, 13 minutes. So please go ahead and submit any more questions that you might have, but we're going to get started on the ones that people have already sent. So the first question is, do acetates tend to crystallize like other foliar nutrients? If they do not, then then is there a distinct advantage over other formulations from that? Crystals, of course, do not absorb. Does that make sense? I think we're missing a couple words there, but.
Yeah, that's fine. But no, they're not going to tend. No, they're not going to tend to crystallize. They're going to go into the plant fairly rapidly. You're not going to see them make a crystal film anywhere. It's just not one of the things that's inherent to that particular formulation. Those molecules don't tend to crystallize. Okay.
Yes, that would be an advantage that they don't. What are the phytotoxicity risks associated with using acetates, or are there any risks? I don't know with that.
I don't know that I've ever seen any phyto situations. I choose to never say never when it comes to phytotoxicity, because you can always put on too much of anything to cause a problem. But in the normal course of things and at the rates we use, I have never seen a problem. In fact, one time I was challenged that I was going to get that they had used some of my copper and they had a phyto situation. So it happened to be on cherries. And so at the time I had a pretty active cherry orchard. So I increased the rate about 10-fold and reduced the rate of water, made a foliar application, saw no phytotoxicity, and thought, I wonder how much copper I got into that plant. Pulled some tissue analysis, and I was all the way up to 60 ppm of copper in those leaves. And when you look at any of the results, they say that above 20 is phytotoxic. Well, I got 60 in there and never burned a leaf. So anyway, from my experience, I've never seen phyto.
Okay, another great advantage. Okay, let's see. Here's our next question. I used to use a zinc acetate, ACA, and anhydrous ammonia for corn in Iowa and Illinois. Is that an option for your product, or are they not compatible?
I've never tried it in that situation. And the ACA product actually is completely different than what we actually make. So if you look at those two chemistries, they're completely different. I've never tried it in that situation. I don't know how to answer that question, but we can certainly take a look at it and see if it would work.
Okay. All right, we'll move on. Can acetate-based nutrients be used for seed treatments directly?
Seed treatments directly. I'm assuming what they're talking about is spraying it on the seed.
Yeah, that's how I take it too.
Haven't tried it. Don't know. My guess is it probably wouldn't cause a problem. Here's the thing you want to think about. When I said earlier that a plant makes acetic acid, and it's a plant root exudate. So what that means is that plant is actually pushing acetic acid out into the soil. Mm-hmm. And what's it doing that for? It's trying to pull back in an element. So if that acetic acid that plant produced contacts zinc in the soil, what did it make? It made zinc acetate. So it's going to pull zinc acetate back into that plant. And would that harm a seed? At lower rates, my impression is it would not harm the seed. And my impression is that it would be of a benefit to the plant. However, having never done it, I always want to try things well in advance of causing a real problem for somebody. So I would not think it would cause a problem, but I would want to take a look at it, probably greenhouse trial before I ever said anything, before I ever really tried it in a field situation.
Okay. All right. We will move on to our next question, which is, what acetate micros would be beneficial to add during a fungicide pass on corn and on soybean?
Depends on the life cycle of the plant and where you're at, on what nutrient that plant's going to require at that time. So it just depends, like I said, on stage of growth of the plant. Mm-hmm. So I think you need to look at the plant physiology before you blanketly say, oh, you should always use this element, which I don't believe is true. I think they need to be timed to the physiology of the plant.
Okay. So basically the time that you're applying the fungicide for whatever disease, then you have to think about what micros might be useful during that time.
Correct. Early on, usually I'm going to do something like a zinc manganese. Those are the two I'm going to think of early if the plants are small. If the plants are bigger and get into a reproductive stage, I might think about something like a potassium-iron combination or a potassium manganese. Those are the kinds of things I would think of later. So just like I said, depends upon the where that plant is physiologically in its life cycle.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What acetate micros do you see as necessary in an alfalfa foliar?
The one that always comes to my mind basically isn't an acetate. When I'm looking at alfalfa, I'm typically thinking mostly of something like boron, and depending on my soil pH, I might take a look at molybdenum, but neither one of those can be acetates because they both carry a negative charge. They're anions, and you can't make an anion into an acetate, only cations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that answers another question. Somebody else wanted to know if you had a moly. So the answer is no, correct?
I do make moly, but you can't make molybdenum into an acetate. You can put molybdenum into a solution, but it can't go into an acetate form because of the charge that the element carries.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Here's another question. Can all acetates be mixed together?
They can be mixed together in a spray tank. If you're trying to do what I do and do a formulation and package, you have to know what you're doing. Because like I said, that they're highly active molecules. So that means that they can interact with one another. And so it really easy to not understand the chemistry of how these go together and have a real mess. Like I said, in a spray tank, I have never seen an issue dumping elements into there because you've got a lot of water. And so it's usually not an issue. High concentrations, you can have some problems. Yep.
All right. I don't know if you've done this because they're talking about fruit here, but it says how to effectively supply potassium and calcium to fruit and seed at the same time. Maybe by fruit, they're meaning corn or soybean, but that's question number 9 there.
Say that again, Robin. I don't know that
how to effectively supply potassium and calcium to the fruit and seed at the same time.
Typically, when I think of calcium, plants preferentially want to take calcium through the soil. Really difficult to get a response from a foliar application. And it takes a very high volume. And so, we can get a response, but like I said, it takes a lot. I mean, plants don't like to do that. Potassium, on the other hand, potassium will go through the plant very easily. The thing I think that's important, especially about nutrients like that, is it takes a very high volume of that element for that plant. And so I think of the nutrients that really I couldn't supply completely without soil would be calcium is one of them. Potassium's another one. I can't do that totally with foliars. You have to have some soil levels to get those to work. The minor elements, I can do those completely on a foliar situation, but you get into the macros and secondaries, you really can't do that because of the huge volume that it requires.
Okay. All right, we have time for 1 or 2 short questions. One, I'm not sure if this is something you can really answer without knowing more details, but the cost of the product per acre?
Very similar to what you normally do. I mean, we're not going to be extremely expensive. Typically, when we're looking at applications, depending on what we're doing and what element it is, naturally is going to make a difference in what the cost is. But, we're very competitive with most other types of foliars. Okay.
All right. And here is our last question before we're going to need to close out. How big of an issue is water quality in response, I guess in the plant's response to the nutrient? You talked about ideal pH for plant uptake.
Water quality is always very important, I think, with just about anything you can do. You get high calcium water, high bicarbs in the water. You can have issues with a lot of different things. Most of the micros won't react to that and too negatively, but certainly I know some of the herbicides will, and for sure things like phosphorus will cause an issue, but most of the micros don't seem to have much problem with it. However, I like to have as clean a water as I can. In fact, when we do our manufacturing, we use deionized water to make all of our products with, because I do not want any background element to cause an issue in my manufacturing process.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, all right. Well, thank you again, Wayne and Brock. I think we're going to honor everybody's time and end the webinar on time. So I want to remind everyone that you can rewatch the whole webinar or go back and look at parts of it again at the same link that you used to get on today. You'll also receive an email tomorrow with a reminder and the link. So that'll be convenient for you. And you can also find the webinar links for all our webinars at croplife.com/webinars. For those that are seeking CEU credit, remember not to close your browser before the event is fully ended, or you won't be able to get the email with the QR code that you need. So, and again, this is for viewers watching the archived webinar. So I want to thank you again for joining us today, for taking the time out of your day to do this. And thank you to CultivAce for making this webinar possible. So have a great day, everyone.
And thank you.
Thank you.